Hello and welcome to Newsnight, where we speak to major league players in Nigeria's democracy and the issues generated from its drive for growth and development. I am Ladi Akiridoluale. It's our pleasure to have you join us. National politics and attempts to tackle some of the myriad of challenges generated by insecurity grabs our attention. Actors at various parts of the divide are positioning themselves and putting out defenses of their regional positions. My guest is academic, social commentator, and politician, Dr. Junaid Mohammed. Dr. Mohammed, thank you so much for your time. Welcome to Newsnight.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, the nation, I guess it may be a hackneyed cliche now, the nation is again at a crossroads on many points. And you have been most vocal more recently about some of these points. Former President Olusegun Obasanjo wrote a letter, open letter, as he described it, to the current president, Muhammadu Buhari, listing concerns, worries about the security situation in Nigeria at this time. But you didn't really think that his intentions were altogether altruistic.
Well, I am very cautious about reading or divining meanings into what people say or trying to read their own motives. Fundamentally, I believe in a democracy. Everybody must have his say. That includes those who are purveyors of majority view or those who are purveyors of minority view. As they say, the minority will have their say, the majority will have their way. But that is not to say that one part is important and the other one is not important. Everybody is important. What Obasanjo says is as important as what somebody who is working the land, the fields in his farm, and certainly what he says is as important as somebody who works in a factory or who works in a government office. Where I take issues with Obasanjo, and we've been friends for a very long time, since 1976. I could go to him, see him anytime when he was in the cabinet office. We have a number of friends in common. What I find difficult is this obsession with making public matters that ought not to be made public. Because by making them public, you are in fact going into a contradiction. And what you say may in fact be counterproductive. Secondly, even though Buhari was his junior in the military and they fought the civil war together, even though Buhari did not work directly under him. And it is not my headache, it's not my business to defend Buhari, and I've never defended him because I believe if you are in public life, you are fair game, whether you are president, whatever public office you are holding in a democracy. And I always underline in democracy. Now, if you make one letter public, it creates whatever it was you wanted to create. You make a second one. Again, it hasn't had much of an impact. You also have seen him in between the first and second one, and you also have seen him in between the second and third one. That shows that, A, you are not giving him advice in public because you don't have access. People like me who are commoners or like you may not be able to go in and see the president. But he can see him anytime, he can talk to him anytime. The only thing he cannot do, perhaps for security consideration, would be to simply ask him to come and see him. But if it were the reverse, before Buhari became head of state first time and now he's the president second time, he could actually ask Buhari to go to Ota or to Abeokuta to see him, or when he's in Abuja to see him. So I thought there must be some protocol within which those people who are living in that rarefied atmosphere, they can interact among themselves. And if you want to advise somebody, and you are really truly sincere about it, you are not out for mischief or cheap publicity, you do it in whispers. You go and whisper at him, so cannot be right. My experience is that so is also not right. But if you decide to go the pompous way, write a big letter and quote A, B, and C, tell how much history you know, how much geography you know, how much connections we have with heads of state and heads of government and what have you, it becomes counterproductive. And what you say may be very important. So you can see that the man you're advising will not be able to benefit. The country will also not benefit from some of these things. And that's why I thought enough is enough of these public letters. And if you write somebody a public letter, by definition, you are not advising him. You are making cheap publicity for the country to recognize, and your irrelevance, either in the scheme of things or in what happened, or you are trying also to cultivate your your own place in history, come what happens in the future. And you may also be trying to say, well, after all, I got it right, everybody else got it wrong. That is unfortunate, especially when you're talking about the destiny of 200 million people.
Now, going beyond the messenger, taking a look at the message itself, did he have some valid points?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. In the words of late Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, no man is entirely evil. And you cannot dismiss a man who has been a president twice and he say his ideas don't matter or what he's saying is irrelevant. No. But the manner of conveying a message is as important as the messenger himself and the topic which he tries to address. So I will be the last person, and I've known him intimately in terms of having very serious discussions about the future of this country, as I said, since 1976. So he must have ideas. But the way and the manner and the style of presentation is as important as the message itself, and that's what you learn in public life. I have no doubt in my mind that a lot of what he has been saying is important. But it is important only if it is going to be utilized for improvement and for the good of the country. If it's going to be used like in a marketplace, then at the end of the day, we get ourselves into unnecessary skirmishes and vulgar language and people taking positions on primordial sentiments and not necessarily on what ought to be rationally advisable for the good of the country.
Now, let's look at the issue itself, which is this security, because that was the subject of the letter. And it's also been the subject of a lot of discussions across the country in more recent times. First, what do you make of our security situation as it is today?
I regard it as badly managed. I regard it as very, very precarious. I believe if anything were to terminate the existence of this good country we call Nigeria, the first will be security. And if security is not handled, and I admit it has not been properly handled, then we have a serious problem. And for the security to be rationally handled, it has to be effectively handled by putting square pegs and square holes. If you put generals who may be there to make money, you heard what happened in Sokoto when 400 million naira is being called into account and the GOC is under house arrest. Now, if those who cannot maintain the safety and integrity of 400 million are given a whole division to command, and they have shown the true character the way we are being told, then we are in very serious trouble. Secondly, if you remember, I think a year or two ago, the soldiers in the northeast rebelled. In the process, in fact, shot and wounded their commanding officer, a whole GOC and a general. It shows you that we are not managing the security well. Thirdly, since the appointment of the current service chiefs, they have not been changed, even though they were overdue to be changed. I don't believe in an organization like Nigerian Army, in a country like Nigeria, any general can be regarded as indispensable. Nobody is indispensable. And when a general succeeds or fails, then we have a very serious problem if he feels he cannot be replaced. Because the idea that if you are in a post, you are there indefinitely is a very serious matter. And if you are to do the posting, the deployments and what have you, it has to be done on a rational basis in accordance with time-tested procedures, in accordance with the best procedures that are known globally. Now, these service chiefs have had their terms and tenures as service chiefs rolled over a number of times. In the process, they have destroyed at least 1 or 2 generations of officers who are due to take over from them. That is unfair, that is injustice, and I believe we are giving the current officer, service chiefs corps, the impression that somehow Nigeria cannot do without them. I don't believe Nigeria can do without anybody.
But they can argue that they don't extend their tenures themselves. Their service chiefs, they're appointed by the commander-in-chief. And the commander-in-chief probably has enough confidence in them, which is why he keeps rolling over their terms more than once, and that could be some kind of testimony to whatever he believes are the objectives he set for them, which they have achieved.
Well, first and foremost, the commander-in-chief per se does not set those objectives. The objectives are set within the service, within a single formation. And those objectives are bound to change, and they have to change, because no single battle is the same. They keep changing these battles, and the officers, given their own training and their own perception of what is the task ahead, can do that for themselves. But let me also tell you that the fact that the commander-in-chief is being served and that the service chief are serving at the pleasure of the commander-in-chief, who is also happens to be the head of the country, doesn't make his judgment infallible. No. Mistakes can be made, and mistakes have been made. Secondly, there is this very interesting relationship between field commanders, service chiefs, and the commander-in-chief himself. Because you must consider and, interact and find out what the soldiers and the officer corps are thinking, and what they think not only about what they're engaged in terms of combat, but what in fact they feel about the combat itself. If officers and men don't believe in the task, for example, fighting insurgency or banditry, you cannot motivate them enough. Secondly, if the morale is so low that soldiers went to the extreme extent of assaulting their officers, then you know there is something fundamentally wrong. You now have to come back, withdraw, sit down, discuss the essence of the battle itself. Do they believe in what we are doing in the Northeast? Do they believe in what is happening in fighting the banditry in the Northwest? Do they believe in what we were doing, what we were engaged in, thank God, in the past, in the Niger Delta? These are very important points, because we are doing it for the good of the country. And if they don't believe in the country, what do you do? Certainly somebody who is willing to steal 400 million out of what belongs either to the government or what belongs to the services themselves, that man cannot be said to have faith in Nigeria as a country. It is very important for us to realize that whatever you do, no matter how well-intentioned you are, you have to do it within a certain regulation, within a certain norms, within what we call the best practices. There have been brilliant generals all over the world. There have been generals who also spectacularly failed because certain things were not done in accordance with procedures. It is important for us to realize that when somebody's time is up, either it's time for him to leave the service, or it is time for him, in fact, to be redeployed outside to go and rest his bones. That should be done, and it should be done in a very timely manner. If that is not done, it can create a negative ripple effect, which will cost the country and cost the armed forces a lot, and nobody wants that to happen. And what is happening in some of these active areas nowadays is so fundamental that, in fact, if it continues to be badly handled, we may find ourselves in a situation whereby nobody seems to be in charge. So whether you call yourself a commander, a commanding officer, a GOC, or the numero uno, they say in Latin, you find yourself not achieving your utmost, and that is not good enough for us.
But I wish to find out from you, though, in your view, do you think the battle in the Northeast is being won?
It is not being won.
Why do you say that? Because the government says it is. The services are saying it is.
Must I believe what the government says? I don't have to believe what the government says. And don't forget the fact that I have been in government, even though I have been out of active government for the last 40 years. But I have been in government. And I have been in those committees that exercise oversight responsibilities on the armed forces, on the budget or the appropriation process, and I have interacted with quite a number of generals. Many of the generals you see today who are now retired, either in politics or out of politics, have been friends of mine. General Akiri Nade, Ibrahim Babangida, Buhari himself. We have been friends. And we have been friends with them from the days of the Civil War, from May 1967, when the Civil War started. So we have to be very careful about, what we say. And sometimes when you are outside the field of operations, you can have an insight, you can see a few things here and there. Those who are directly involved may not have the time to actually have the necessary insight to do. But all we are saying is that the war must be fought, terrorism must be finished, but it has not been finished. And mark you, there is a facile definition of fighting a terrorist organization. As long as they don't control, so we hear from jokers in the presidency, as long as they don't control any area, then they are finished. Now, first, that is not scientific. It is not in accordance with what you call military science. If you want to destroy this thing, it takes more than enough to take over their territory, because they can come back and retake it again. Secondly, by definition, a guerrilla warfare or terrorism is what you call an asymmetric warfare. That is, it is a bigger force fighting a very small, tiny force which is mobile. So you cannot tell me that because people, the army, and some people who are, cheerleaders for the army, are making noise about the terrorists are not controlling any territory. And that by itself, in fact, is not true. Because up till today, they are still in Sambisa forest. They are still around Baga, around Lake Chad. And they are not only controlling territory within Nigerian territorial land, they are also in Niger. They are in Cameroon. They are in Chad. So
but this was what the multinational joint task force was supposed to address, involving these countries.
It has not addressed it. If it has, it hasn't done it well. It's one thing to do something, it's another thing to do well and successfully. It has not been done.
Let me take you to what you alluded to earlier, the Northwest, and then the issue of banditry, because those are new manifestations of what may have been a general already existing problem. Sokoto, Zamfara, Kaduna, Katsina, stretching the belt, stretching into Bauchi, and on into Adamawa,
and down,
and then forward down into Benue,
and Plateau and Kogi.
Now, if that is to be taken outside of the Northeast insurgency, what do you make of it?
Well, first and foremost, my idea is that a lot of the problems we have their roots, not just in some banditry which somewhere springs up every day and we begin to see it. There's always been some major lawlessness because this country is under-policed, is controlled by army and other security services. The solution lies in one, having reasonable, good, reliable, funded and provisioned government. Now, without that, there's nothing you can do. You can create about 100 security organizations. They will not do the job. Secondly, you also have to go to the underlying problems in the country. There is grave injustice in both the Northwest and in the Northeast, and in parts of Benue which have been under attack. There have been clearly insensitivity to the cries of the people. Politics have been completely commercialized and monetized, and that nobody sincerely believes in fighting the war against corruption. Indiscipline has become the norm.
You mean the president and his government?
It is not just his, no. He inherited the system. He has tried what he regards as his best to make sure that some of these issues are resolved. But clearly he has succeeded somewhat, but not as much as we Nigerians would like to have him succeed. And I have always said it publicly, and I'm saying it here, that to the extent you can give an individual credit for the fight against corruption, you must give it in equal measure, not only to the president, but also to the young man who is the head of the EFCC, and to the people who are also working hard in the ICPC. So you can see that if you accept that argument, then you must now conclude that the fight against corruption is like the fight for national existence. Because clearly we cannot continue along this way and expect to survive, because we seem to be challenging the Almighty that we can misbehave and somehow get away with it. That is not good enough for us.
Well, the most dangerous part of this is that it would appear as if it has now assumed both an ethnic coloration and then a religious coloration. Both the banditry in terms of targets,
The terrorism in the Northeast.
terrorism in the Northeast in terms of targets now, and then of course the much bigger one which had been in existence before those reared their heads, which is the issue of the farmers, the herdsmen clashes. That seems to defy all solution, and people point to the fact that, well, it could be difficult to resolve, and some have in fact pointed accusing fingers at the president that he himself is a Fulani, and therefore when he comes to the battle, he doesn't come with clean hands.
Well,
what do you say?
First and foremost, there have been leaders from different parts of the country and from different ethnic groups. And in this specific case of the Fulanis, out of the 54 sovereign states in Africa today, there are identifiable, clearly known settlements which are Fulani. And Fulanis, in the way they have now been manifesting themselves, have been having the same altercations with some of the farmers in Ghana. I have a daughter in Ghana. I have, 2005, I went with my Tamasule, and we to see her, and we gave a lecture at the University of Ghana, Legon. There is ongoing now hot war between the Fulanis, even those who are settled, and some of the other ethnic groups in Mali. In fact, it prompted the Malian president, Babakar Keita, to remove the former prime minister and put a Fulani man. Still, the problem has not been solved. The problem of the herdsmen and the farmers did not start this time around or in the present generation. I remember when I was growing up, some parts of this country, here in Kano and in other parts of Zamfara, Kebbi and Sokoto, there used to be those altercations, but they were minor. They could always be handled. I remember in the town I went to secondary school, it's now in Jigawa State. I had an alkali, a local judge, who happened to have been a student of my father's. So he was partly responsible for me while I was away. It's about 82 miles away from here. And there used to be those altercations, especially during the summer when the Fulanis have sold some of their cattle and they have a lot of money. They're getting married or something, or doing something funny. My concern is the British did not consider it their responsibility during the colonial era to really nip this problem in the bud. The North Regional government was mostly a government of local aristocrats who had a party, NPC, and who thought that, look, by the force of their personality, they could subdue the Fulanis. Now you can see that all these efforts have not succeeded. We need something much more important. Thirdly, there was introduction of guns and other varieties of modern weapons. After 2011, when the French, the Americans, and the British had, for one reason, decided to overthrow Gaddafi and kill him. And you must have seen some of these famous parody when the one time American Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, was dancing and shouting that we came, we saw, and he died, which means she was celebrating the death of another head of state of a sovereign country. Now, with this kind of attitude, the West cannot point out accusing fingers at anybody, because most of the small arms in West Africa today emanated from Libya. Now, in the course of the Obama government alone, he started and destroyed, he and Hillary Clinton destroyed Libya. He did the same thing with Syria. He has also destroyed Yemen. And there are lots of other countries. And he has made the situation in both Afghanistan worse. We have to be very careful in divining what is the cause of our problem and looking for honest and realistic solutions, because the proliferation of small arms in the West Africa region and the Sahel is a major problem which is acknowledged even by the United Nations itself. And some of these arms were bought off the West by Gaddafi, and he paid them handsomely for it. In addition also, in spite of what they say about him in public, they go crawling and taking money from him. As I'm talking to you now, President Sarkozy is in court for taking bribe from from him among other people. We have to be very careful. I'm not saying that because other people have created a problem, we should do nothing about it. No. Because a lot of the problem has to do with outside forces and some has to do with inside forces, in addition to the other aggravations we have. The religious aggravation, the territorial aggravation, the ethnic aggravation. We have to learn to know that this thing is damn serious. It has no time for frivolities like after all these people come from the east or from the west or from the north. No, it is a national problem. If we believe in the country, I think it is important for us to realize that the country is not going to survive and prosper unless we are prepared to handle the problems and handle it as a national problem. When the Civil War came, and there was a real threat of the country being balkanized, everybody came, chipped in, and the whole situation was normalized. I can say some of the best years that I have seen in my own lifetime, I'm now in my 70th year, happened immediately after the Civil War. Well, in spite of the aggravation of the Civil War, the fact remains that we came back, we now put our heads together, created for ourselves a new constitution, a new system of government, and mastered it. So whatever is the fault of the constitution or the system we have, this is the fact that it has been tried and tested over a certain period of time. If we are to rediscover that attitude, I have no doubt in my mind that this country is a thriving concern. It is a workable project, and I have no doubt in my mind that Nigerians can make it.
But the government has tried to address this herdsmen Fulani crisis. There was the question of stopping open grazing and creating ranches, which then morphed into cattle colonies, and then at some point something called Ruga was also muted, although now suspended. But it seemed as if for each program, each attempt to bring it about to say, okay, look, these clashes could only be solved if we avoid this clash of interests between these two groups of people in particular, amongst others. It has divided the country. You have people from various parts of the South saying, no, we're not giving up our land for what is essentially private business. And then, of course, you have the herders saying, well, you can't stop us from grazing freely. We have done it, our ancestors did it, and the Constitution guarantees free movement. Then you have the government in the middle saying, well, everybody can live anywhere in the country they please and go about their lawful business. But yet, the problem persists. Clashes continue, deaths are recorded, crops are destroyed, cattle are killed, and there are tit-for-tat attacks back and forth. So, at the end of the day, it's as if we're on the same spot in spite of so much seeming activity.
I agree with you. Over the last years, especially over the last 10, 12 years, we have had too much motion, too little movement. I dare say that the fault is not in our genes or in our blood vessels. The problem is that the Nigerian political elite have been exceedingly irresponsible. One, they are prepared to use every possible concept, every possible means, every possible idiom for political benefit. And as long as we continue that way, we are going to go nowhere. That's one. Number two, the responsibility of a government, among other responsibilities, is to ensure that when they want to introduce a concept, the Ruga is a concept, the ranches is a concept. Whatever you're talking about as regards this specific problem is a concept. One, it has to be persuaded itself. The government itself must be persuaded. You must adopt some of the best practices elsewhere, because we're not going to be the first to have this problem and the first to make an attempt. And that attempt must be a determined attempt or effort to resolve the problem. I haven't seen any sincerity in the way this government or previous government has tried to solve this problem. In fact, many of the people, even with the best of intentions, know nothing about the issue they're trying to solve. Because if you are asking, you want to solve somebody's economic problem, you don't know his way of life, you don't know his culture, the do's and don'ts of that culture, you're not going to succeed. Now, for example, Ruga and a ranch, to me, are one and the same thing. It doesn't make any difference. Secondly, what the government needs to do is to follow the law. And I believe within the current constitution, within the current land tenure law, the decree which is in the constitution itself, there is the possibility of the federal government acquiring land, modest amount of land, where they can now warehouse some of these cows and goats and sheep. And there will be minimum friction between those animals and their herders and the people who own the land and who till the land. But if there is no sincerity, there's nothing you can do about it. In addition also, there is the issue of what do you call modernity? For example, in Europe, especially as a result of what they call the Common Agricultural Policy, they decided that because they want to maintain the way of life of people who live in the villages of Europe, they are going to set aside a piece of land, pay for its being fallow, and that they are going to maintain that within the Common Agricultural Policy, and they are going to, pay very expensively to the farmers. Even if they don't farm the land, they are still being paid. Even if they don't have cows or sheep, they are going to pay for it. Now, a nation can afford to subsidize a way of life of people because they consider it as one of those intangible heritages of people. Now, the fact that if you now reserve the land and you say, look, we can keep this portion of the land, which is tiny and minimal, it means that you are favoring somebody. It's sheer nonsense. 72% of the land mass in Nigeria today is in the north. 72%. And concomitantly, 72% of the water resources, fresh water resources, which is ideal for farming, is also in the north. So what is all the fuss? Fayemi was saying that nobody is going to take land from Ekiti. Who is taking the land from Ekiti? Where, in fact, is the land? We have to be very careful about the language we use. And we find some people who have never farmed in their life. They have never known what it means to hold, is it Molue you call it? They are now talking about farming. If you want to make a rancho Aruga in Lagos, where will you make it? Nowhere. And we had this discussion with Falana a few times, a number of times over the last how many years? It must have been over the last 12 years or so. When we said, look, the biggest meat eaters in this country are in the southwest, that the governors should come together and make some of these, whether you call them ruga, whether you call them ranches, what have you, over a period of time. So that when they come before they are taken to the slaughterhouse, you take care of them, you make sure the people who are with them, a few of them, 3-4 people, have somewhere to sleep, and then you provide law enforcement within those areas. The governors refused. Now, they don't want the farmers, the herders to leave. They will not allow the herders to come and, even a temporary time, to graze on some of those, polluted lands around Lagos and in the lagoons. What do you want to do? And then you say you don't want the people to go. What do you want them to do? So if in a nation of 200 million people, the land is divided into 72% and 28%, what is the problem there? So as far as I'm concerned, what needs to happen is, first, the government should be very clear as to what it wants to do. And it has to also be sincere that it wants to solve the problem. Secondly, there is the need for massive education. We have some useless group of people who call themselves Mieti Allah. Until a few years ago, nobody heard of Mieti Allah. But these people are at the service of some politicians and some emirs and chiefs, particularly in the north. Who are they serving?
Well, they say they are representing the interests of the headsmen.
They're talking nonsense. Most of them don't know where the headsmen are. Because, look, if I own a cattle And I decide I will now employ a herdsman and ask him to start going, and then he will come once every 6 months or once every year. He will come back. I will see the herdsman, how many I've given him back and what have you, and then I pay him off. You cannot tell me that that person is beholden to any emir or chief. They're not beholden to anybody. It is an investment and partly a way of life. It can be financed by those who decide to finance it. If you see me go near a molwe or a cow, it's only slaughter it and eat when the salah comes or when I have money to spare. We have to be very careful. But where responsibility has taken leave is nowhere to be seen, as it happens with the Nigerian political class. There's nothing you can do.
I think you're referring to Malu.
Is it Malu? You call
Malu,
it,
yes, that's
Malu.
the cow.
That's the cow.
I've been trying
Malu.
to get what it was.
Yeah,
That's
Malu.
actually referring to the Malu.
So what will I do? Nothing. But we have to be very careful, because politics is the only game now in town. It's the only way of making money. Chiefs are in it, Obas are in it, Obis are in it, Igwes are in it, Malams are in it. It's the one way to make money. And nobody cares in the process to grow the national economy, so that you and I and the people who are coming after us will have the means to go to school and get an employment. Nobody cares about that. Just make money, because oil money has somehow, we have become addicted to oil money. And nowadays, of course, whether you are in the oil producing area or not, you're looking for cheap money to make. That is a very dangerous thing. But let me tell you, one of the reasons or one of the essences of leadership is to take decisions, and take decisions that are right and proper. The idea that a government can announce over the radio that they're establishing ruga, they're establishing ranches or whatever they call themselves, has been counterproductive. So let's go back to the drawing board. And not say that, okay, after all, it's a problem of herders, herdsmen and farmers. No, it is everybody's problem. Because you eat meat, I eat meat. And from where you come from, I'm sure you people eat a lot of meat. You eat more, you eat every part of the cow. So it is important for us to realize that, look, this problem is not a small problem. It's about feeding, it's about security, it's about harmonious living, it's about maintaining the territorial integrity of the country and maintaining it while it is safe to do so, and in a cost-effective manner.
But there are those who argue that, and this is a narrative, so I mean, you can correct me if that narrative is wrong, that there's an inbred attitude, culture of the Fulanis, that gives the impression that they believe that they are here to rule the rest, and that anything that challenges that narrative is to be crushed, and that is at the base of this battle between herders and farmers, that no matter what you do to address the issue, the herder is born with the belief that he is free to walk anywhere he pleases with his cows, and for those cows to eat whatever it is that is available anywhere they come across it.
I will answer your question of your observation very carefully. One, these Fulanis, yes, are herdsmen, but they are not only herdsmen. The herdsmen in the dry lands of the Levant, of the Middle East, coming from biblical times. There are still herdsmen in Mongolia who don't keep cattle, but they keep camels.
Right.
And they're all over the world. So it is a way of life. And among some Jewish groups, especially in Israel and in the Middle East, that in fact is like a preordained calling to them to behave and live that way. But that does not mean they have to go and kill people. And that does not mean that they have automatic ownership to land, resources, or in fact to allow their own camels or cows or goats or sheep to go and graze on people's land. No. In spite of that, there is still land ownership which is leasehold, freehold. And these people have the right to the extent that they don't go and damage people's crops. And that applies to Nigeria. But you see, with this combination of arms, proliferation from Libya, and now the Fulani man knowing that he knows how to handle a Kalashnikov and other grenades and what have you, we have a very complicated situation. Now, why is it that in some countries, which are in fact endowed with both the sheep, the cow, and of course the grazing land, we don't have similar problems. And when they occur, they are handled. I told you, 2005, I was in Ghana with late Meta Masule to see my daughter. Now, if these things can be handled with political will and goodwill amongst people, it can be handled. But let me tell you, at the rate we have been introducing new measures and withdrawing them or dropping them, we are not going to solve any of Nigeria's problems. Because I don't believe we are sincere about it. And if we are sincere about it, I want to see the leadership coming from the government itself. I haven't seen evidence of that leadership. And if a government cannot explain to me and you, those of us who voted for them, what they want to do and why it is necessary for them to do so, what makes them think that automatically they announce a program, it becomes acceptable? This is a self-inflicted wound on the part of the government. I'm not saying that they're entirely at fault. And of course, I said, I hearken to the irresponsibility of the political elite, who are prepared to make anything political in order to gain political things. Some of the statements I have heard from, for example, the governor of Benue and his colleague in Taraba, and they're always fighting among themselves. As I'm talking to you now, there is an ongoing fight between the chiefs who are in the villages and towns around Wukari, Ibi, Takum, all in Taraba State, and the original Jukuns and Takuns and other ethnic groups in that area. So if he doesn't like people from the far north, he has made it clear, and he can abuse Fulanis or anybody who has a cow. Well, what is happening between him and his neighbors, with whom they have been living together in the bush since before he was born? You can see that. If somebody is determined to be irresponsible, there is nothing you can do about it.
Well, you talked a lot about the inclusion, the coming in of politics into all of this, and what you described as the irresponsibility of the political elite.
Yeah.
Now, there are those who said that once the 2019 elections ended, and President Buhari won a second term, the politics shifted to that of 2023, and that all of this actually can be described as people staking out positions ahead of 2023. You have been quoted as saying that, look, the argument that, okay, because the president has gotten a second term, that's the 8 years for the North this time, and that it should come down south, and that even the argument in the South that it is the turn of the Easterners is wishful thinking. Can you develop that point? Why do you say that, if indeed you did?
Well, firstly, I have never believed in the zoning and rotation thing. Because zoning and rotation is supposed to have been built on some artificiality. That a Yoruba man in Ilorin or Offa belongs to the north, whereas his neighbor in Oshun or Oyo State belongs to the south. It's sheer nonsense. Secondly, you are making democracy to actually clash, A, with common sense, B, with the rule of law, and you're saying that you can manage our political system in such a way that over the years, everybody will have a chance to be a president or to have himself and his ethnic group predominant in the government. Now, in this issue, history is the best teacher. You must have heard of a country in the past called Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia has a myriad of ethnicities, a myriad of people who have gone as one people artificially into war against Hitler, 1940 to 1945. And they had a powerful, predominant, charismatic personality in the person of late Field Marshal Tito. And when he came, they realized they had a real problem. They said, okay, let's try this zoning and rotation. They tried for as long, and it worked for as long as Tito was alive. The moment he died, the concept of a united Yugoslavia with some of these small, or these cantons, you call them, or states, collapsed. And unfortunately, it's easy to bring a country by means of war and maintain it in some measure of peace. But trying to break a country peacefully is never done. Most countries break up through the premium of war. And I'm not sure there are many Nigerians who would like to pay another price in terms of bloodshed in the name of maintaining zoning or rotation. Secondly, You now ask people to go and vote who they want to vote. But you say, okay, you can only vote so and so within a certain premium, within a certain group. Now, you say there are 6 geopolitical groups, 3 in the north, 3 in the south. How many people from the north have tasted power? And in whose name are they tasting power? In whose name is Buhari now the president of the country? We have to be very careful in choosing our words and do so with maximum responsibility and care. Now, for example, if any of the 2 parties, major parties, others are jokers, if any of the 2 parties decide to nominate somebody from the east, from the southeast, and the people from the south will decide also to nominate somebody else, what is going to happen? Are you going to tell the man in the southwest that he has to withdraw? Or if a northerner decides to contest the election, right, outside Buhari, are you going to tell them that the votes are not going to count? You put together a contraption which doesn't make sense, it's undemocratic, and you say it must work because you are Nigerians. Who are you? You mean you can now defy history, defy the rules of political science and possibly economics, and create something which has been tried elsewhere and not just in Yugoslavia and failed. And you're telling us that, yes, after 2019, it is our turn. Our turn where? Who are you? Are you over and above the 200 million Nigerians?
It does appear, of course, that the zoning thing before 2019 already seemed to be problematic, because in the presidential elections that held before, people from across the country contested in spite of some arrangement by some of the parties.
Yes, whatever arrangement they had, they tried it. By some good luck, they got away with it. But what guarantee is there that by the time you and I come to 2023, or our children come to 2023, the system will be there and we're going to religiously follow it? It's not going to happen. Because if we don't see anybody coming out, and I'm not saying that is the case, we have somebody coming in from some of the other zones, and Nigerians decide that he's good enough, or he's endowed enough, he has enough filthy wealth to go and contest for an election, you cannot say he cannot. And if in the process, he, another anointed person, anointed by the ridiculous zoning and this policy, and if he wins, what do? There's nothing you can do.
Dr. Mohammed, it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming.
Very much.
Thank you very much.
We've come to the end of this episode of Newsnight. Do make our time to join us for another edition next week. I am Ladi Akiriduluale. Goodbye.